And so, we settle in. You can feel your body beginning to grow heavy, in the most pleasant way. In our time together tonight, there is nothing to examine, nothing to understand, only the gentle rhythm of a story that begins not with a whisper, but with a soft, collective gasp. In a grand theater filled with the warm, flickering glow of 1,000 tiny flames, we are drifting back to a place of immense beauty and unspoken danger. To feel the velvet of the seat beneath you and the electric anticipation in the air. Before we drift too far, if you feel a connection to this place, you are welcome to leave a quiet like or subscribe. Think of it not as a task, but as leaving a soft footprint in the sand before you continue your journey inward. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave a comment, letting me know what city you're listening from, and what time it is. There in your quiet corner of the world. It's a nice way for me to know who I'm sharing this stillness with. Alright, let the shadows in your room grow long and soft. Maybe you can hear the faint sound of your own breathing, and together, let's allow the story to begin. You find yourself sitting in the plush, velvet cushioned darkness of the Paris Opera House. Not the one that stands today, the magnificent Palais Garnier, but its predecessor, the Sala Paletia. It's the mid-19th century, and the air around you is thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, damp wool coats, and the faint, almost sweet smell of the city itself, the low murmur of 1,000 conversations. A sea of French and English and German hums around you like a living thing. Then, a hush falls. The scattered candles and oil lamps that once provided a dim, smoky light to the grand auditorium begin to extinguish, one by one, plunging the space into a deeper, more profound darkness than you're used to. For a moment, there is only the sound of rustling fabric and a few nervous coughs. And then, it happens, with a soft, collective hiss that you can feel as much as hear. The stage erupts in light, not the warm, gentle, familiar glow of a candle, but something new. Something brilliant, intense, and shockingly white. This is the magic of gaslight. The technological marvel that has transformed theater forever. The painted backdrop, which in daylight looks like a flat, crudely rendered forest, is suddenly a place of impossible depth and shimmering leaves. The light creates shadows that dance and play, carving out a world that feels more real than reality itself. From your seat, you can feel a subtle wave of heat washing over the front rows. It's magnificent. It's revolutionary. And if you were an engineer, you would know it's a health and safety nightmare waiting to happen. You lean forward, trying to peer into the wings. You catch a glimpse of a man, the chef Gossamer, standing before a complex switchboard of pipes and levers. They call it a gas table. H.E.S. not an artist, not a director, but for this moment, he is the most important person in the building. He turns a valve here, pulls a lever there, playing this immense, volatile instrument of light. He can make the stage blaze like noon or dim to a ghostly twilight with the turn of a wrist. This control is unprecedented, but it's a living, breathing system. The light flickers, it breathes, it hisses with a constant, low-level reminder of the flammable, invisible substance being pumped through miles of lead pipes all around you, behind the scenery, above the stage, and directly at the feet of the performers. This is the secret of the new stagecraft. Controlled explosions, happening hundreds of times a second, all for your entertainment. You look around at the faces of your fellow patrons, illuminated in this stark new light. Most are mesmerized, their mouths slightly agape in wonder. This is progress. This is the future. But others, you notice, seem less certain. An older woman in the row ahead of you whispers to her companion, half and fluttering nervously. The light is unflattering. It's harsh, unlike the soft, forgiving kiss of candlelight. This new gaslight is a truth teller. It reveals every smear of makeup, every bead of sweat on a singer's brow, every tiny darn in a costume. Historians still debate this. Of course, was the arrival of gaslight a moment of pure, unadulterated public wonder, Or was there a quiet resistance, a longing for the softer, more romantic illusions of the past? For now, you see the debate playing out in the faces of the audience. Some see magic, others see a beautiful monster. And the monster is hungry. As the overture begins and the heavy velvet curtain starts to rise, the hissing of the gas jets seems to grow a little louder, the air a little warmer. The light on the stage floor seems to shimmer, waiting for something delicate, something beautiful, something dangerously flammable to dance into its embrace. The heavy red curtain continues its ascent, vanishing into the darkness above, and the stage is fully revealed. The orchestra's music softens, shifting from a grand overture into something airy and haunting. The painted forest you saw earlier is now the entire world. The gaslight, expertly manipulated from the wings, casts long, eerie shadows and creates balls of silvery, moon-like luminescence on the stage floor. The scene is set for a fairy tale. And then, they appear. From the darkened edges of the stage, the dancers of the corps de ballet emerge. They don't walk. They seem to glide, their movements so light and fluid that they appear to be floating an inch above the wooden boards. They are a flock of white apparitions, their faces set in masks of serene, otherworldly grace. They are the sylphs, the witches, the ghosts, the supernatural creatures of the romantic imagination brought to life. You watch, mesmerized, as they perform their synchronized movements. This is the new style of ballet that has taken Paris by storm, a style that emphasizes ethereal lightness and emotional expression over the rigid, courtly dances of the past. The goal is to defy gravity, to make the audience believe these women are not made of flesh and bone, but of moonlight and mist. And in this perfect storm of technology and artistry, the illusion is flawless. The brilliant gaslight bleaches their costumes to a ghostly white, making them pop against the dark, sylvan backdrop. Their point shoes, a relatively recent innovation, allow them to rise up on the very tips of their toes, adding to the sense of weightlessness. They are the biggest stars of the age, not just dancers, but full-blown celebrities. Forget famous authors or brooding poets. These ballerinas are the true idols of Paris, men of wealth and title. The so-called A-bons fill the front boxes. Their opera glasses train not on the whole stage, but on the face or form of a single, favorite dancer. They will shower the stage with flowers at the curtain call and wait for them at the stage door. These dancers endorse products. Their likenesses are sold on little cards and commemorative boxes. They are, in every sense, the first modern superstars. Suddenly, the music swells, and the real star of the show makes her entrance. The core parts like a sea of white foam, and there she is, the prima ballerina. The audience erupts in a wave of applause. She is grace personified. She completes a turn, a pirouette, and it seems as if she hangs in the air for an impossible moment before her feet whisper back to the ground. At one point, she is lifted by wires, a piece of stage magic that is both breathtaking and, if you look closely, a little bit terrifying. For a split second, you catch the glint of a dark, greasy wire against the painted sky, and hear the faint creak of the hidden machinery in the rafters. It's a reminder that this fight is a mechanical trick, another layer of hidden, precarious technology in this house of illusions. But the audience adores it. They see only the angel soaring above them, and this raises a question that historians still quietly discuss. When the audience looked at these women, what did they really see? Did they see divine artists, dedicating their lives to a pure and noble art form, or did they see something else? It's unknown, if politely ignored, fact that many of these dancers, often from poor families, relied on the financial patronage of the wealthy A-bons to survive. Backstage, there was a special room, the foyer de l'audience, where these patrons could mingle with the performers after the show. It was a world away from the purity of the performance you are witnessing now. So, were these dancers artists or courtesans, angels or exquisitely trained commodities? The truth, as always, likely lies in a murky, uncomfortable middle ground. But out here, in the magic glow of the gaslight, such thoughts feel like a betrayal. You are meant to believe in the fantasy. You watch the star, her face a perfect portrait of tragic beauty, her arms moving like the wings of a swan. She is the center of this universe, the sun around which all the other little stars orbit. She and her fellow dancers are perfect, ethereal beings. They are like beautiful, delicate moths, fluttering dangerously close to a series of open flames that line the stage floor. Their fragile wings made of the most beautiful and the most flammable material imaginable. The ballerina takes her final bow, a delicate incline of her head, and the curtain falls. The spell is broken. The applause is thunderous. But your focus is drawn away from the stage. Let's slip away from the velvet seats, past the uniformed ushers, and through a small, unmarked door. We are now in the wings, the chaotic, beating heart of the theater. And it's here, up close, that you can finally see the dress. Hanging on a hook, waiting for the next act, is one of the ballerina's costumes. From the audience, it was a cloud, a puff of smoke, a dream made tangible. Up close, it's a different story. It's an engineering marvel of a very specific and very fragile kind. This is the romantic tattoo, the costume that defined an era. It's not the stiff, plate-like disc you might picture today. This one is softer, more bell-shaped, cascading down to mid-calf in layers of ethereal fabric. You reach out and touch it. The material is crisp, light, and surprisingly scratchy. It's made of tall, fine, machine-made netting, and muslin, a lightweight, plain meat cotton fabric. Sometimes they even used gold. These materials were chosen for one reason above all others: their weightlessness. The goal was to create an illusion of the supernatural. And for that, you needed a costume that could move and float as if it was spun from air itself. And this one has dozens of yards of it, layer upon gossamer layer, all designed to catch the light and swish with a sound like whispering dry leaves. To give the skirt its distinctive, hairy volume, it was treated. The layers were soaked in starch and then ironed to create a stiff, almost paper-like structure that wouldn't wilt under the hot stage lights. It's this very stiffness that creates the beautiful bell shape. It's also what turns the dress from merely flammable into something closer to an incendiary device. The combination of lightweight, loose-weave cotton and the highly combustible starch coating creates a fabric with an enormous surface area, ready to ignite at the slightest touch of a flame. It is, quite literally, the perfect kindling. And the name for this beautiful death atop, Chunto. The exact origin of the word is one of those things scholars love to argue about over dusty books. But one popular, and rather cheeky, theory is that it comes from the repetitive, informal French word QQ, which was slang for, well, the posterior. A little nod from the patrons in the front row, perhaps, to the new, higher-cut hymnines. It's a silly name for an object of such sublime beauty and such profound danger. This, of course, leads to the great debate about the tutu itself, a conversation that still happens in the halls of dance history. Was this design purely an artistic evolution? The official story is yes. As ballet technique became more complex, with faster, more intricate footwork, the petit allegro, the old, heavy, floor-length court dresses were simply too restrictive. The new, shorter, lighter tutu liberated the dancer's legs, allowing the audience to fully appreciate the dazzling skill of her movements. It was a practical solution to an artistic problem. But there is another school of thought, one that considers the powerful male gaze of the 19th century audience. These new, shorter skirts revealed more of the dancer's legs than ever before. Was the design driven not just by a desire to see the artistry of the legs, but the legs themselves? Was the ballerina's liberation also a new form of objectification, packaged as artistic progress for the wealthy men in the front rows? The truth is likely a complex angle of both, art and commerce, Security and pro-rents have always been awkward dance partners. For now, you just look at the dress hanging in the dim light of the backstage. It is a paradox. It represents the pinnacle of an art form, a symbol of grace and transcendent beauty. It is also a meticulously crafted fire hazard, a multi-layered trap of starched cotton, waiting patiently in the wings. All it needs is a spark, and as you're about to discover, the stage has plenty of those. Your eyes drift from the crisp white to back towards the stage. The curtain is still down, and stagehands are bustling about, shifting scenery for the next act. This brief pause in the performance gives you a chance to see the source of all that brilliant, dangerous light without the distraction of the ballet itself. You step closer to the edge of the wings, and the first thing you notice is the heat. It's like standing near a large, open oven. You look down at the front edge of the stage. The part closest to the audience, running its entire length, is a long trough, set into the floorboards. This is the ramp, or what we would call the footlights. Inside this trough, you can now clearly see them. A long, perfectly straight row of individual gas jets. There must be hundreds of them, each one spouting a steady, unwavering, 6-inch tongue of pale blue and yellow flame. They hiss, a constant, serpentine CCS that underpins all the other sounds of the theater. This is the primary source of illumination, designed to throw light upwards onto the performers' faces and bodies, erasing the natural shadows and making them glow. It is also, effectively, a line of fire separating the world of the audience from the world of the stage. And that's not all. You look up into the cavernous space above the stage. A dark maze of ropes, pulleys, and wooden gantries. Hanging there, suspended like fiery chandeliers, are more pipes fitted with even more gas jets. These are the battens and wing lights. They hang just behind each layer of scenery, illuminating the painted backdrops and lighting the performers from the sides and above. The entire stage is boxed in by open flame, above, to the sides, and in front. To perform here is to perform inside a cage of fire. You notice a small, seemingly insignificant detail. Over the footlights, there's a crude wire mesh guard, like a low fence. This is the era's idea of a safety feature. It's meant to keep the dancers' long, flowing skirts from drifting directly into the flames. In theory, it's a fine idea. In practice, you can see it's flimsy and full of gaps. Worse, you overhear two stagehands complaining that the star ballerina for the next act has demanded the guard be lowered even further because it casts an unflattering shadow on her ankles. The illusion is everything. Safety is a negotiation. The whole system feels both ingenious and terrifyingly fragile. You can see the lead pipes snaking along the walls and floor, carrying the volatile coal gas from the main supply in the cellars all the way up to these thousands of little jets. A single leaky joint. A moment of inattention from the chef Garzier at his gas stable, and this whole magnificent tinderbox could go up. It's a bit of a weird fact, but the pressure in these pipes was notoriously unstable. The Garzier didn't just have to turn them on and off. He had to constantly adjust the flow because the pressure from the city's gasworks would rise and fall depending on how many streetlights were lit or how many homes were cooking dinner. A sudden surge in pressure could turn a 6-inch flame into a 2-foot jet in the blink of an eye. This is the central, baffling question that historians and theater scholars still puzzle over. How did they just accept this? How did hundreds of people, dancers, singers, stagehands, musicians, go to work every single day in an environment that by any modern standard would be immediately condemned? Some argue it was a form of mass denial. The sheer novelty and beauty of the gaslight blinding everyone to the obvious, ever-present risk. The gains in spectacle were so immense that the dangers were simply considered unnecessary, if unfortunate, cost of doing business. Others suggest it was denial so much as a different cultural understanding of risk. This was, after all, an era without modern safety regulations. People worked in factories with exposed machinery, lived in homes lit by candles, and cooked on open hearths. Danger was a part of daily life in a way that is difficult for us to comprehend. Perhaps a stage lined with open flames didn't seem so extraordinarily dangerous to them as it does to us. It was just the office. As you stand there, watching the hissing flames, you see one of the young dancers from the Cordy Ballet practicing a step in the wings. She moves with an unconscious awareness of her surroundings, her wide skirt swaying. She takes a step, turns, and the edge of her starched tall skirt billows out, passing within inches of a gas jet lighting the backstage area. It doesn't catch, not this time. But watching her, you realize that navigating this fiery world is part of their training, an unspoken piece of their choreography. They have learned to dance not just with the music, but with the fire. But fire is an unpredictable partner, and sooner or later, it will demand to lead. As the stagehands continue their noisy work and the dancers stretch in the dimly lit wings, a new figure emerges from a dressing room. She's young, perhaps not yet 20, with a serious, focused expression that seems to set her apart from the others. She isn't gossiping or laughing. She moves with a quiet, deliberate grace even when she's not on stage. Her name is Emma Livry, and even in this crowded backstage world teeming with talent and ambition, she has a certain aura about her, a quiet hum of potential. You see her walk to a corner of the wings, placing a hand on a piece of scenery to steady herself, and she begins a series of slow, controlled stretches. Her movements are precise, economical. She is one of the subjects, a dancer who has risen from the ranks of the Corps du Ballet and is now performing small solo parts. She's on the cusp of stardom, the one everyone is whispering about. Have you seen Emma Livry? The critics ask in their columns. She has the soul of Taglioni. That name, Taglioni, hangs in the air like a benediction. Marie Taglioni was the goddess of the previous generation, the ballerina who defined the romantic style. The first to truly popularized dancing endpoint. To be compared to her is the highest possible praise. And in Emma, the resemblance is uncanny. It's not in her face, but in her style. She has the same ethereal quality, the same seeming ability to flirt, the same expressive, almost tragic grace in her arms. You watch her as she practices. She's rehearsing a short solo for a later act. She does a series of quick, intricate steps, and you can see the intense concentration etched on her face. Her brow is furrowed, her lips slightly parted. She finishes the phrase, holds her balance on one point shoe for a breathtaking moment, and then relaxes, a small, frustrated sigh escaping her lips. It wasn't perfect. She turns and does it again, and again. This is the source of that otherworldly grace you see on stage. Endless, repetitive, obsessive work. She is what was known as a ballerina, a born ballerina, from a very young age. Her life has been a singular, straight line aimed at this very stage. Her own mother was a dancer, though not a particularly famous one. This lineage is both a blessing and a curse. It meant she had access and training from childhood, but it also meant the expectations were immense. Her entire existence has been shaped by the discipline, the pain, and the relentless pursuit of an impossible physical perfection. One of the odd, lesser-known facts about a dancer's life at this time was the Class D perfectionnement. This was an advanced class for only the most promising dancers of the opera. But it was more than just a class. It was a public performance in itself. The wealthy A-bonds, those patrons with the backstage passes, were allowed to attend. Imagine trying to perfect your craft, to fail and try again, in front of a critical audience of powerful men who held the keys to your future career and financial stability. This is the world Emma navigates every day. A world of intense artistic pressure coupled with unsettling social scrutiny. And here we find another one of those historical arguments that bubbles just beneath the surface of the official narrative. Was Emma Livry a pure, naive artist, totally devoted to her craft and blissfully unaware of the sordid politics of the opera? This is the romantic version of her story, the one that would be solidified after her death. Or was she a savvy, Ambitious young woman who understood exactly how the game was played. Did she use her prodigious talent as a shield, maintaining an air of artistic purity while making the necessary connections and appeasing the right people to advance her career? It's impossible to know what was in her heart, but it's naive to think that anyone could rise so quickly in such a cutthroat environment without a keen understanding of its power dynamics. To know, all you see is the dancer. A stagehand walks past her, carrying a flaming torch, a prop for the next scene. He holds it high, keeping it away from the flammable scenery. Emma doesn't even flinch. She is so focused on her steps, on the music she hears army in her head, that this casual passing of an open flame is just part of the background noise of her workplace. It doesn't register as a threat. It's just another piece of the beautiful, dangerous machinery of the Paris Opera, the machinery she is determined to conquer. She finishes her practice, nods to herself, a flicker of satisfaction this time, and disappears back into the shadows of her dressing room, a rising star in a world lit by gaslight. Let's follow Emma, not into her dressing room, but further back in time, to an ordinary morning weeks before the performance you just witnessed. The glamour of the gaslit stage feels a world away now. You find yourself in a large, cold, and starkly functional rehearsal room within the Salle Balletia. The tall windows let in a weak, grey Parisian light, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The floor is bare, scuffed wood. The only furniture is a long wooden barrier running along the mirrored walls. This is where the magic is forged, and it is anything but magical. You see a younger Emma, maybe 16 years old, standing at the barrier alongside 2 other girls. A grim-faced ballet master, a maître de ballet, stands in the center of the room, holding a long violin which he occasionally uses to tap out a rhythm more menacingly, to rap against the barrier to correct a girl's posture. The air is filled with the sounds of his sharp, critical voice, the squeaker-point shoes on wood, and the grunts and heavy breathing of the dancers. You watch as they go through their daily exercises, the 5 positions, the ploys, the tendus. It looks like a form of torture disguised as art. Their bodies are pushed to, and beyond, their natural limits. The ballet master walks down the line, physically wrenching a girl's leg higher, forcing her to turn out. There are tears in the corner of one girl's eyes, but she doesn't make a sound. Pain is the price of admission here. It's a constant, dull ache in the muscles, a sharp protest from the joints. Your attention is drawn to their feet. The pointe shoe, the very tool that creates the illusion of weightlessness on stage, is an instrument of torment. You see a girl pause and discreetly lean against the barrier. Lifting her foot, her satin shoe is stained with small, dark spots of blood. Inside that shoe, her toes are cramped, blistered, and misshapen. Bunions, corns, and lost toenails were not unfortunate side effects of the job. They were proof that you were working hard enough. It was a badge of honor. Some historians even describe dancers of this era beating their pointe shoes with hammers to soften them, then darning the tips themselves. Each dancer having their own secret ritual to make the shoes barely tolerable for a few hours. This brings up a fascinating, if slightly stomach-turning, piece of medical history from the period. There wasn't a specialized field of sports medicine when a dancer was injured. They were often at the mercy of doctors whose understanding of anatomy was rudimentary and whose treatments were sometimes more harmful than the injury itself. A sprained ankle, a career-ending injury today if not treated properly, might be treated with leeches to draw out the bad humors, or with mercury-based ointments that slowly poisoned the patient. There was no concept of physical therapy or rehabilitation. You either danced through the pain, or your career was over. It is in this context of constant, grinding physical hardship that you see Emma's ambition shining through. She doesn't cry. When the ballet master corrects her, she listens intently, her eyes narrowed in concentration, and immediately applies the correction. While other girls are flagging, their movements growing sloppy with fatigue, hers remain sharp and precise. She is fueled by something more powerful than just discipline. She has a vision of herself on that stage, in the spotlight, and every agonizing stretch, every blister, is a step towards that vision. And this is where historians find another point of quiet contention. The traditional narrative paints these dancers as passive victims of a cruel system. They were poor girls, often forced into this life by their parents, their bodies broken by tyrannical ballet masters, and while there is immense truth in that, it's not the whole story. To look at Emma is to see agency. She is not just a passive recipient of this brutal training. She is an active participant. She is choosing to push her body this hard. This raises the uncomfortable question: where does victimhood end and ambition begin? Can a person be both a victim of a system and a willing, driven participant in it? The answer, as you watch Emma force her leg into a perfect arabex that makes you wince in sympathy, is a complicated and resounding yes. The rehearsal ends. The girls, drenched in sweat, limp out of the room. The spell of their professional poise broken. They are just tired, aching young women again. But Emma stays behind for a few moments, returning to the berry to practice one more combination that gave her trouble. In the silence of the empty room, with only her reflection in the dusty mirror for an audience, you see the unvarnished truth of the ballerina's life. It is not about glamour or applause. It is about this, a lonely, painful, and relentless pursuit of an impossible ideal. The scene shifts. We are still in the rehearsal room, but the atmosphere has changed. The gruff ballet master is gone. The room is quieter, more reverent. Emma is still there, but she is not alone. Standing before her is a woman who, to the world of ballet, is something close to a living saint. She is older now, in her 50s, her face lined with the wisdom and authority of a queen. This is Marie Taglioni. Taglioni, the legendary ballerina who had retired at the peak of her fame years ago, has returned to the Paris Opera, not to dance, but to teach and to pass on her legacy, and she has chosen Emma Livry as her sole private pupil. For the ballet world, this is seismic news. It's like a forgotten god descending from Olympus to personally train a new hero. You watch their interaction. It's a masterclass in motion. Taglioni doesn't shout or rap a violin. Her voice is low, her corrections precise. She demonstrates a movement, a delicate flutter of the hands, a slight, sorrowful tilt of the head, and her age seems to melt away. For a brief moment, you see the ghost of the self she once was, the dancer who captivated all of Europe. Then she turns to Emma. Non, ma petite, she says softly. Like this. Emma watches, her focus absolute. She's a perfect mirror, absorbing every nuance, every subtle gesture. She tries to replicate the movement. Taglioni steps forward and adjusts Emma's arm with just 2 fingers, shifting the angle slightly. She whispers, "There, now you feel it." Emma nods, a look of profound understanding on her face. This is more than just a dance lesson. This is an anointing. The greatest star of the romantic ballet is pouring all of her knowledge, her secrets, her very soul, into this young, receptive vessel. The relationship between them was intensely close, almost like that of a mother and daughter. Taglioni saw in Emma not just a talented dancer, but the second coming of her own artistry. She was fiercely protective of her, shielding her from the worst of the opera's backstage politics and grooming her for the throne she had vacated. This mentorship brings us to a wonderfully odd and specific detail of ballet history. The lost ballets. Many of the great ballets of the Romantic era, the very ones that made Taglioni famous, no longer exist in their original form. Choreography wasn't written down in a standardized way back then. It was passed from body to body, from memory to memory. A ballet master would teach it to a cast. They would perform it for a season, and then it would often just fade away. We have the music, we have the costume designs, we have the stories, but the actual steps, The original choreography that audiences saw in the 1830 seconds and 40 seconds are largely gone forever. What Tagline and I was doing with Emma was a rare act of preservation, transmitting this ephemeral art form directly to a new generation. Of course, this intense, exclusive relationship caused a great deal of debate and jealousy within the opera. Who was this girl, Emma Livry, to deserve such singular attention? Other, more established ballerinas felt slighted. Critics began to take sides. Was Livry truly a prodigy? Or was she simply the product of a legendary master's obsessive coaching? Some argued that Tagline was trying to create a clone of herself, stifling Emma's own unique artistry in the process. They claimed Emma was becoming a perfect imitation, a flawless echo, but not a true, original voice. This is a classic debate that still rages in any field with masters and apprentices. How much of the student's success is their own, and how much is owed to the teacher? Is a great teacher one who creates disciples in their own image, or one who helps the student find their own different path to greatness? Watching Tagline and Emma work together, you can see the validity of both sides. Emma's movements are becoming more and more like Tagline is. The same ethereal lightness, the same delicate port de brass. It is a stunningly beautiful imitation. But is it just imitation? Or is Emma taking Tagline's style in her own quiet way, making it her own, preparing to transcend her master? The lesson ends. Tagline gives Emma a rare, small smile of approval. Good, she says. Tomorrow, we work on the papillon, the butterfly, a new ballet, being created just for Emma. A chance not to just inherit a legacy, but to create a new one. As Emma gathers her things, her face is glowing with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She is the chosen one. She is being personally guided by a legend towards a future that seems blindingly bright. She is standing at the pinnacle of her art, completely unaware that she is also standing at the edge of a cliff. The buzz in the theater is palpable. It's not just another night at the opera. It's an event. Posters all over Paris announce the premiere of a new grand ballet, Le Papillon, the Butterfly. The music is by the celebrated Jörg Offenbach, a master of wit and melody. The story is a fantastical tale of a beautiful Circassian princess who is transformed into a butterfly by a wicked old fairy. But the real draw, the name on every owner's lips, is Emma Livry. This ballet is her vehicle, her coronation. Marie Tagline herself has choreographed it, crafting every step to showcase her protégé's unique gifts. You are backstage once again, on the night of the premiere. The air is electric with nervous energy. Emma is in her dressing room, putting the final touches on her costume. It is a masterpiece. For the first act, she is a princess. But for the second, when she is transformed, she wears the costume of the butterfly. It's a variation on the classic romantic tutu, but with delicate, iridescent wings attached to the back. The dress itself is the purest white, an airy confection of tulle and silk, designed to look as fragile and weightless as a butterfly's wing. This is it, the role of a lifetime. A star vehicle ballet was the ultimate prize for a ballerina. It meant the entire creative apparatus of the Paris Opera, its composer, its designers, its choreographers, was focused on you. The story was built around your strengths. The steps were designed to make you look divine. If the ballet was a success, you would not just be a star, you would be immortalized. Your name forever linked to that role. Emma steps out of her dressing room. She looks radiant, but her face is pale with concentration. Tagline is there, waiting for her. She gives Emma a final, whispered piece of advice. A last moment adjustment to her posture. It's a passing of the torch, made visible for the entire company to see. The success of this ballet is not just Emma's triumph. It is Tagline's vindication. It is proof that her chosen successor is worthy. You catch a snippet of a conversation between two customers, admiring the butterfly dress. One mentions a strange, almost forgotten, bit of theatrical lore. the idea of a cursed role. Some roles in theatre and opera are said to carry bad luck. While the Papillon was brand new, the theme of transformation into a creature with delicate, flammable wings carried a certain symbolic weight that seemed, in hindsight, like a terrible omen. This is, of course, just superstition. But, in a world built on illusion and spectacle, superstition has a powerful hold. The curtain rises. Emma makes her entrance, and the audience gasps. She is transcendent. She dances the role not as a human pretending to be a butterfly, but as if she is one. Her movements are quick, fluttering, unpredictable. In one of the ballet's most famous scenes, she is chased by the torch-wielding servants of the evil fairy. She frets and darts across the stage, her delicate tutu swirling around her as real, open flames pass just feet, sometimes inches, from the fabric. The audience bears on the edge of their seats. The tension is almost unbearable. The blend of beauty and danger is intoxicating. They don't know they are watching a dress rehearsal for a future tragedy. The performance is a colossal success. The final curtain falls to a roar of approval. The stage is showered with flowers. Critics rush from the theatre to write their glowing reviews. A triumph, they will say. Mademoiselle Livry is not a dancer. She is an artist. She has inherited the crown of tagline. And this is where a subtle historical debate emerges. How much of this success was truly Emma's? And how much was the result of the extraordinary machine that had been built around her? Was the audience applauding Emma Livry, the individual dancer? Or were they applauding the perfect package? A tagline choreographed ballet, with music by Offenbach, starring a beautiful young woman who perfectly embodied the era's ideal of femininity. It's a question about the nature of stardom itself. Does a star create the moment? Or does the moment create the star? The historical record tends to lionize Emma as a singular genius, but some revisionist historians suggest she was also, in part, a beautiful product, perfectly manufactured and marketed by the most powerful forces in her industry. After the show, in the heady joy of the backstage celebration, Emma is beaming. She has done it. She has fulfilled her promise. She has stepped out of tagline eyes shadow and become a legend in her own right. She is the butterfly. The name and the image will be forever hers. The future seems limitless. A straight, bright path to becoming the greatest ballerina of her generation. She is at the absolute zenith of her world, bathed in the glow of her success and the adoration of all of Paris. It is the happiest moment of her life, and it is the beginning of the end. The triumphant run of Le Papillon continues. Night after night, Emma Livry is the toast of Paris, but even as she soars on stage, a darker current runs beneath the surface of life at the opera. Let's drift away from the main stage and into the crowd. Shadowy corners of the building, the dancers' common rooms, the stagehands' break areas, the grimy corridors where the real life of the theatre unfolds. Here, the conversations are different. The tone is not one of adoration, but of hushed gossip and grim, practical warnings. You lean against a wall, an invisible listener, and you start to hear the stories. They are whispered, traded like forbidden secrets. A young dancer from the Corps de Ballet is talking to a new girl. Her voice slow. Be careful of the porte-a lot, she says, gesturing towards a man whose job is literally torch carrier. Last month, in La Juve, he nearly set Celestini's wig on fire. She smelled the smoke just in time. Another story circulates among the older stagehands. They recall an incident from a few years back. Not at the opera, but at a smaller theatre on the boulevard. A dancer, her name already half forgotten, had been performing a solo. She had misjudged her final turn. Her wide, starched skirts winging just a little too far into the wings. It had brushed against a gas jet. They speak of it in clipped, matter-of-fact terms. A flush. A scream. The smell of burnt fabric and hair. The curtain brought down in a hurry. The audience sent home, told there had been a technical issue. The girl was never seen again. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a known hazard of the profession, a grim footnote in the job description. You begin to realize that the danger of fire wasn't a theoretical risk. It was a constant, no-level reality. Small fires were happening all the time. A piece of scenery getting too close to a light, a prop catching a spark, a bit of lace on a costume singeing at the edges. Mess were put out quickly, with a bucket of water or a heavy blanket, kept in the wings for exactly that purpose. They were mundane enough that they were rarely reported in the papers. They were just part of the cost of doing business. One of the more peculiar and grimly specific dangers you learn about is something called fire from above. Sometimes, a piece of lighted carbon from one of the newer, experimental arc lamps being tested for special effects, or a hot spark from a pyrotechnic display, would fall from the lighting rigs high above the stage. It would drift down like a deadly snowflake and land on a dancer's flammable dress. There are accounts of ballerinas suddenly feeling a spot of heat on their shoulder or back, only to realize a small, smoldering hole was eating its way through their tutu. The existence of these prior accidents brings up a thorny historical question that scholars of the period still grapple with. Why was there no institutional outcry? Why didn't the dancers' union, if one had existed, demand safer conditions? Why didn't the press, always hungry for a scandal, expose this pattern of neglect? Some argue it was a conspiracy of silence. The powerful directors of the opera had every reason to suppress these stories. They were bad for business, bad for the pristine, magical image they were selling to the public. The dancers, often young, powerless, and easily replaceable, had little leverage to demand change. To complain was to risk being labeled a troublemaker and losing your job. A more cynical view suggests it wasn't even a conspiracy, it was just a reflection of the era's values. The lives of these girls, especially the lower-ranking ones from the Corps de Ballet, were considered tragically expendable. The loss of a dancer was a personal tragedy, perhaps, but from the institution's perspective, it was a manageable problem. There were always more poor, ambitious girls ready to take her place. You see Emma walk past the gossiping stagehands. She carries herself with the new authority of a star. Does she hear these whispers? Does she know the full history of these fiery accidents? It's almost certain she does. Everyone who worked in the theatre knew, but for her, perhaps, these stories are about other people, less talented people, less careful people. She is the star. She is protected by her talent, by her importance, by the watchful eye of Marie Tagliani. The thought that such a thing could happen to her would seem impossible. A misfortune reserved for the nameless, unlucky girls in the chorus line. The whispers are just background noise. She has a performance to prepare for, an adoring public to enchant. The fire is a danger for other people. It could never touch the butterfly. Amidst all these whispers of fire and the very real, tangible heat from the gaslights, you stumble upon a surprising discovery. Tucked away in a dusty corner of the theatre's chemistry workshop. Yes, the opera had its own chemist, is the solution. It's sitting there, in a large, unassuming vat. It's a chemical mixture, a fire retardant. You watch as the opera's chemist demonstrates it. He takes two identical scraps of tulle, the very fabric used in the ballerinas' costumes. He dips one of the scraps into the vat. A solution of ammonium and sodium phosphates, wrings it out, and lets it dry. The fabric looks different. It has lost some of its bright, pure whiteness. It has a slightly yellowish, dingy cast. It also feels different, less crisp and airy, more limp and slightly damp to the touch, as if it could never fully dry. Then comes the demonstration. The chemist takes the untreated scrap of tulle and holds it near a candle flame. It doesn't just burn. It vanishes in a brilliant, instantaneous flash of orange. Whoosh. Gone. It's terrifying to see how quickly it happens. Then, he takes the treated scrap, the ugly, yellowish piece, and holds it to the flame. The fabric charls. It blackens. It might smolder if the flame directly touches it, but it does not ignite. It does not burst into a terrifying fireball. It is, for all intents and purposes, safe. This process was not a secret. It had been developed and tested. The management of the Paris Opera, stung by a few too many close calls and perhaps a pang of conscience, had made it available. They even, at certain points, tried to make it mandatory. Dancers could have their costumes, their precious tutus, Carteronized, named after the chemist, Monsieur Carteron, who had perfected the formula. Here was the answer. A simple, effective way to prevent a horrific and entirely foreseeable accident. So why, you have to ask, was it not universally embraced? Why was Emma Livry, on the night of her greatest triumph, dancing in a highly flammable, untreated costume? The answer lies not in science, but in aesthetics and the deeply ingrained culture of the ballet. You hear the ballerinas themselves complaining about it. It ruins the dress, one says, holding up a treated sleeve with disgust. It looks like old dishwater. They call the treated costumes elades, ugly. The process dimmed the brilliant, ethereal whiteness of the tulle, which was so prized under the gaslights. It made the costumes look cheap, worn, and second-rate. There were other, more practical complaints as well. The dancers claimed the chemical solution made the fabric heavy. It didn't float and swirl in the same magical way. It clung. It drooped. It ruined the illusion of weightlessness that was the entire point of their art form. Furthermore, they complained that it made the fabric stiff and abrasive, that it chafed their skin during long performances. Some even claimed the fumes from the chemicals gave them headaches. This introduces a curious, and rather niche, historical debate among costume historians. Were these complaints legitimate? Or were they an excuse, a form of professional vanity? The scientific data on the fire retardant is clear. It worked, but the dancer's subjective experience of wearing the treated garments is harder to quantify. Some historians argue the ballerinas were being overly precious, prioritizing vanity over their own lives. They were slaves to an aesthetic ideal, even if it killed them. Others take a more sympathetic view. A ballerina's entire career was built on creating a perfect, flawless illusion. The costume was not just an accessory, it was an essential part of that illusion. To them, wearing a dingy, heavy, ugly dress was not a minor inconvenience. It was a form of artistic sabotage. It was like asking a master violinist to play on a cheap, out-of-tune instrument. They believed, perhaps rightly, that the audience's adoration, and therefore their career, depended on that perfect, snowy white, floating image in their minds. The risk of wearing a ruined dress was more immediate and career-threatening than the abstract, no catastrophic risk of fire. So the ugly, safe alternative sits there in its vat, largely ignored. It's a perfect metaphor for so many failed safety initiatives throughout history. The solution exists. It is known. It is available. But it is rejected because it is inconvenient, because it is ugly, because it interferes with the way things have always been done. The choice seems obvious to an outsider like you, but to the people inside the system, caught between the demands of their art and the realities of their dangerous workplace, the choice was much, much harder. And for Emma Livry, it would be a fateful one. The scene solidifies. We are in Emma's dressing room, a small, cluttered space filled with flowers from admirers, pots of makeup, and the tools of her raid. It is some time after the premiere of Le Papillon, but the pressure has not let up. The role is demanding, and the expectations are impossibly high. The door opens and a functionary from the opera administration enters. He is holding a piece of paper, a waiver of some sort. His expression is one of bureaucratic indifference. He is here to discuss the matter of the fireproofing. Management is on another one of its periodic safety kicks, likely prompted by another minor incident or a letter from a concerned official. They are insisting that all principal dancers either sign the waiver, formally declining the fire retardant treatment for their costumes, or submit their dresses to the process. This is the moment. A simple, administrative procedure, a choice, presented on a piece of paper. Emma is there, along with her mentor, Marita Glionai. You can feel the tension in the small room. The functionary makes his case, perhaps emphasizing the safety benefits in a flat, uninspired tone. Then, a costume assistant brings in the sample tutus to illustrate the choice. One is the standard, brilliant white, the fabric crisp and full of life. The other has been carteronized. It hangs there, limp and pathetic. Its color is sad, yellowish ivory. It looks like a wedding dress that has been stored in an attic for 50 years. Taglianoi, the great artist, looks at the treated costume with undisguised contempt. To her, it is an abomination. It is a betrayal of the aesthetic she has spent her entire life perfecting. She may have been concerned for her protégé's safety, but her concern for the purity of her art was likely greater. We can't know exactly what she said, but her expression, her posture, her artistic authority would have spoken volumes. Emma looks from the ugly, safe-dressed to the beautiful, dangerous one. For her, it's not really a choice at all. Her entire identity is now wrapped up in being the butterfly. The butterfly is not a dingy, yellowing moth. The butterfly is a creature of pure, dazzling light. To wear the treated costume would be to fail, to present a lesser version of herself, to disappoint the audience that adores her and the critics who have crowned her. It's at this moment that she is said to have made her famous and tragically prophetic statement, while the exact wording is a matter of historical legend, passed down and likely embellished over time. The sentiment is consistent in all retellings. She dismisses the idea of the fireproofing, saying something to the effect of, "No, thank you. The dress will be ugly, and my wings will not fly." This quote, whether apocryphal or not, has become the centerpiece of the Emma Livry legend. And it fuels one of the most enduring debates about her story. Was this a statement of profound artistic dedication? A young woman declaring that she would rather risk death than compromise her art? This is the romantic interpretation. It turns her into a martyr for beauty, a hero who chose it over life. It's a very 19th century romantic notion, the suffering artist who sacrifices everything for their vision. Or was it something else? Was it the statement of a naive, perhaps arrogant, young woman who simply did not, or could not, comprehend the reality of the risk? Was it less a brave artistic manifesto and more a form of youthful denial? This more modern, psychological interpretation sees her not as a martyr, but as a victim of her own success. She felt invincible, special, exempt from the dangers that plagued lesser dancers. She was the star, and stars don't burn. She picks up the pen and signs the waiver, a simple signature on a bureaucratic form. It's a moment that is both mundane and monumental. Without flick of the wrist, she accepts full responsibility for the flammability of her own costume. She is freeing the opera from liability. She is making a conscious, deliberate choice. Aesthetics over safety. The illusion over the reality. The functionary, his job done, takes the paper and leaves. Taglianai gives a small nod of approval. The beautiful, pristine, untreated costumes for La Papillon are safe. Emma turns back to her mirror. The incident already forgotten. Her mind already on the night's performance. The choice has been made. The waiver has been signed. And in the silent, bureaucratic files of the Paris Opera, a piece of paper now sits like a time bomb, its fuse lit, waiting for the inevitable, tragic spark. The wings of the butterfly will be allowed to fly, unburdened by the ugly weight of safety. Let's pull our focus back from that small, fateful decision in the dressing room and look out at the wider world that created the pressure for it. You find yourself once again in the audience. But this time, you are not just a passive observer. You feel the collective personality of the crowd, its desires, its expectations, and you realize this audience is a beast, and it is hungry. The 19th century was an age of spectacle. It was the birth of mass entertainment as we know it. For the first time, Large segments of the population, from the wealthy elite to the burgeoning middle class, had disposable income and leisure time, and they wanted to be wowed. They were living in a world of rapid technological change, railways, steamship, the telegraph, and they expected their entertainment to keep pace. They didn't just want to see a pleasant little dance. They wanted magic. They wanted thrills. They wanted to see things on stage that they could not see anywhere else in life. You listen to the conversations around you during the intermission. A wealthy merchant is complaining that the previous season's ballets were a bit dull. His wife agrees, adding that she hopes to see more effects this year. The opera glasses, which you previously saw as tools of admiration, now seem more like instruments of intense scrutiny. The audience is not just watching, it is judging. Every movement, every costume, every piece of scenery is being evaluated against an ever-rising standard of perfection and novelty. The critics in the newspapers hunger. You can almost see their influential columns taking shape in their minds. They write with flowery, dramatic language, praising innovation and mercilessly mocking anything that feels old-fashioned or safe. They use words like breathtaking, death-defying, and miraculous. They are in a symbiotic relationship with the theater. The more spectacular the show, the more sensational their review can be. They are not just reporting on the culture. They are actively pushing it towards greater and greater extremes. This relentless demand for more had a direct impact on the technology of the stage. It's why the gaslight was adopted so quickly, despite its dangers. It's why stage managers work constantly experimenting with new pyrotechnics, trapdoors, and complex wire flying rigs. One particularly bizarre, and thankfully short-lived, trend you learn about was the use of electric fire on stage. This involved early, unstable arc lighting technology to create dazzling flashes and sparks, often showering the stage with hot, incandescent particles. The public loved it. The fire marshals, to the extent that they existed, were horrified. This intense pressure from the audience creates another of those historical debates with no easy answer. Who was ultimately responsible for the dangerous conditions on stage? Was it the fault of the theater managers, who chose to prioritize profit and spectacle over the safety of their employees? Yes, certainly. But were they acting in a vacuum? Or were they simply responding to the clear and overwhelming demands of their customers? If the audience had rewarded safer, less spectacular shows with their ticket money, the industry would have changed overnight. But they didn't. They paid to see the butterfly dance near the flame. They rewarded risk. This puts the individual dancer, like Emma, in an impossible position. She is not just dancing for her art. She is not just dancing for her mentor, tagline. She is dancing for this demanding, insatiable beast. She knows that her fame, her career, her very livelihood, depends on her ability to give the audience what it wants. And what it wants is magic. A limp, yellowish, fireproof dress is not magic. It is a drab, disappointing reality. It breaks the spell. You watch the second act begin. The audience leans forward in collective anticipation. They want to be transported. They want to forget their ordinary lives, their businesses, their domestic troubles. They want to believe, for 2 hours, in a world of fairies and sylphs and flying butterflies. They are not thinking about the gas jets, or the flammable fabric, or the signed waiver in a filing cabinet. They are not bad people. They are simply consumers of a fantasy. But their collective desire for that fantasy creates the very conditions that make the tragedy possible. They are unwitting accomplices. The ballerina on stage finishes a dazzling series of turns, and the crowd erupts in a roar of bravado. She has given them what they want. She has fed the beast, for now. But the beast is never satisfied for long. Tomorrow, it will want something even more spectacular, even more dangerous. The pressure is relentless, and it is this immense, unspoken weight of public expectation that hangs in the air of the Paris opera, as heavy and as toxic as the fumes from the gaslights themselves. The routine of the performances grinds on, Night after night, Emma dances the butterfly. Night after night, she is showered with flowers and applause. The danger, which was once a whispered novelty, has now faded into the background, becoming just another part of the familiar backstage landscape. Complacency begins to set in, and that is when the universe decides to issue a warning. It's an ordinary performance, no different from any other. You are in the wings, watching the show from the stage manager's perspective. It's the scene you've seen before, where the evil fairy's henchmen, carrying real flaming torches, chase the butterfly around the stage. It's a moment of high drama, a dance of choreographed chaos. Emma is in the center of the stage, executing a series of rapid, fluttering steps. One of the torchbearers, a junior member of the acting troupe, perhaps a little too caught up in the drama of the moment, gets closer to her than he is supposed to. His torch, a thick wooden staff wrapped in oil-soaked rags, dips slower than the choreographed height. For a split second, time seems to slow down. You see the flame, a greedy orange tongue, lick out towards the billowing layers of Emma's tutu. It's a near-perfect recreation of the accident that is waiting to happen. The flame is inches away. You feel a collective intake of breath from the stagehands in the wings who see what is happening. The stage manager takes a half step forward, his hand reaching for the signal bell to drop the curtain. And then, with a shake of her body, a movement born of pure instinct and muscle memory, Emma spins away. The turn is not in the choreography. It is a pure, reflexive act of self-preservation. The flame sings the very outer edge of the toll. For a tiny, horrifying moment, a small, glowing ember appears on the hem of her dress, like a demonic firefly, but the speed of her turn, the swirl of air created by her skirt, is enough to extinguish it almost instantly. It's over in less than 2 seconds. Out in the audience, no one noticed. They saw only a particularly dynamic and passionate spin from their star ballerina. They probably thought it was a brilliant artistic choice, a moment of inspired improvisation. They applauded it. But backstage, it is a different story. A wave of cold shock washes over the crew. The torchbearer, his face white as a sheet, finishes the scene and stumbles into the wings, stammering apologies. The stage manager grabs him by the arm, his voice furious. No snarl. Emma herself comes off stage at the end of the scene, her chest heaving, not just from the exertion of the dance, but from a massive surge of adrenaline. She touches the hem of her dress where the flame licked it. There is a small, brownish black mark, no bigger than a coin. A tiny scar on the perfect white fabric. This was it. They shot across the bow, the universe screaming a warning in their faces. This is what can happen. This is how easily it happens. This is not a theoretical danger. It is real, and it is inches away, every single night. You might think this event would trigger a crisis, a moment of reckoning. Surely, no. They would insist on the fireproofing. Surely, no. Emma would put her foot down and refuse to perform without it. But that's not how human psychology often works, especially in high-pressure environments. The near miss is not interpreted as a sign of impending doom. Instead, it's interpreted as a sign that the system, in its own chaotic way, works. She was fine. Her instinct saved her. The danger was faced and conquered. The incident, rather than shattering their complacency, reinforces it. It becomes a badge of honor, a cool story to tell. Did you hear about what happened to Emma Livry last night? Nerves of steel. That one. This is a phenomenon historians and sociologists see in many high-risk professions. It's the normalization of deviance. A small departure from safety rules that doesn't result in disaster is not seen as a failure, but as a new, acceptable level of risk. The near miss paradoxically makes them feel more invincible. Not less. They flew too close to the sun, and they didn't get burned. They must be special. So the show goes on. The torchbearer is likely fined or given a stern warning. The choreography is perhaps reviewed to add an extra foot of distance. But the fundamental problem, The flammable dress in the open flame in close proximity remains unchanged. The warning shot has been fired, but no one has truly listened. They've mistaken luck for skill. They have taken a terrifying glimpse into the abyss. Instead of stepping back from the edge, they have convinced themselves they've learned how to fly. The small, charred spot on the hem of the tutu is repaired, and the dress is sent back into the nightly battle between beauty and fire. The triumphant season of Le Papillon eventually comes to an end. Emma Livry is now a certified superstar. After a short rest, she is slated to appear in a revival of an older, much-loved opera, L'amour est de Portici, The Mute Girl of Portici. Her role is not the lead, but a featured ballet sequence within the opera, a common practice at the time. It is a prestigious spot, a chance for her to shine in a classic, canonical work. The day is Monday, November 15th, Ballerinas. You find yourself not in the glamour of a premiere, but a general rehearsal on the main stage. The atmosphere is starkly different from a real performance. The auditorium is dark and empty, its velvet seats like rows of silent ghosts. The stage is lit not with the full, magical brilliance of the gaslight, but with a harsh, functional work light. A single row of hissing jets known as the servante, or the servant, just enough to see by. There is no orchestra, just a single, chilly-sounding piano in the pit, clunking out the melody. The performers are not in full costume. Most are in rehearsal clothes, simple practice skirts and tights. But Emma is an exception, because her dance is a standalone feature. She needs to get the feel of performing in her actual costume. She is wearing her full tutu. It's not the butterfly dress, but one designed for this opera. In a similar style, layers upon layers of white, starch, and utterly flammable muslin. The rehearsal is dragging. It's a long, tedious process. The director is working on a crowd scene, and the ballet dancers are told to wait in the wings. It's cold in the vast, unheated space. The dancers huddle together for warmth, chatting, stretching, trying to stay loose. It is a scene of profound, almost boring, normality. This is the unglamorous reality of the job, hours of waiting around, punctuated by brief moments of intense work. Emma is standing in the wings, on the left side of the stage. She's watching the scene unfold, waiting for her cue. She feels a chill and rubs her arms. She shuffles a little closer to the source of light and warmth, the servante, the single row of open flames that provides the working light. She is doing what anyone would do on a cold day, trying to get warm. The layout of the stage at this specific moment is critical. A piece of scenery, a large painted flat representing a building, has been placed nearby. This creates a small, semi-enclosed alcove in the wings. Emma is standing in this alcove, between the scenery and the stage, with a row of gas jets just a few feet in front of her. A fellow dancer, one of the other soloists, sees her and gently warns her, "Be careful, you're too close to the lights." Emma, perhaps distracted, perhaps a little annoyed by the unsolicited advice, glances down. She seems to be a safe distance away. She reportedly makes a light-hearted, dismissive comment, something like, "Don't worry, it's perfectly safe." She then lifts her skirt with both hands and shakes it out, a common habit for dancers to ensure the layers of tulle are not crumpled and will float correctly when she goes on. This is the moment. A simple, absent-minded, everyday gesture. This small, seemingly insignificant detail, the shaking of the skirt, is a point that historians often focus on, as it speaks to the normalization of the environment. For a dancer, the tutu was like a part of her body. She knew its dimensions, its weight, how it moved. Shaking it out was as natural as a writer tapping their pen. An unconscious tic born of thousands of hours of practice. She had likely done it 100 times before in a similar proximity to the lights without incident. But this time is different. The placement of the scenery flat has subtly altered the air currents in the wings. The draft it creates is invisible, imperceptible, but it is there. The stage of the Paris Opera was notoriously drafty, a fact that was a constant complaint among performers. Historians who have studied the blueprints of the old Salle Poletti often debate the exact aerodynamics of the stage, trying to reconstruct the precise conditions of that moment. Was it a draft from the large loading doors? Was it the convection current from the gaslights themselves? It's a level of forensic detail that is impossible to confirm, but the effect was real. So, when Emma shakes her skirt, a gesture she has made 1,000 times before, the light, airy fabric does not just fall back down. A single, outer layer of the starched muslin catches the invisible draft. It billows out, just a few inches further than usual. It floats, for a fraction of a second, like a cloud of dry cotton, and then it drifts directly over one of the hissing, waiting flames of the serpentine. The scene is set. The characters are in place. The unheated warnings have all been given. The laws of physics are about to collide with the laws of aesthetics. The ordinary, boring rehearsal is about to become the site of a legend. It happens in less time than it takes to draw breath. One moment, Emma Livry is a dancer, waiting in the wings. The next, she is a column of fire. The outer layer of her muslin skirt does not catch fire in the way you might expect, with a small flame that grows. No, the starched, airy fabric, with its immense surface area, ignites all at once. There is a sound, a soft, terrifying whoosh, like a giant gas stove being lit. A flash of brilliant, hungry orange light erupts from her waist downwards. For a single, frozen moment, no one seems to react. The sight is so sudden, so impassible, that the brains of the people watching cannot process it. The actors on stage, the director, the stage hands, they all just stare, paralyzed by disbelief. Emma herself seems frozen for a split second, looking down at the impossible sight of her own body engulfed in flames. Then, a scream. It's a sound of pure, primal terror. It rips through the cavernous, empty theater, echoing off the velvet seats and gilded decorations. It is the sound of a dream turning into a nightmare. Her training, her discipline, her entire life of controlled movement deserts her. She is no longer a ballerina. She is a terrified human being in unimaginable pain. She does the single worst thing a person on fire can do. She panics. She runs. She bursts from the wings onto the main stage, a human torch, screaming and flailing her arms. The flames, fed by the oxygen of her movement, leap higher. They spiral up her torso, consuming the delicate fabric of her bodice. Her hair, held in an intricate stage coiffure, begins to smoke. The sight is so horrific, so beyond the realm of normal experience, that the other performers on stage scatter, stumbling backwards in terror. This moment of panic is a crucial and tragic detail. Everyone who worked in the theater knew the rule. If you catch fire, you do not run. You drop to the ground and you roll. You smother the flames. Heavy, woolen blankets were kept in the wings for this exact purpose. But in a moment of pure, blinding agony, knowledge and training are meaningless. Instinct takes over, and her instinct is to flee from the pain, an act that only makes it infinitely worse. You see a man, a firefighter stationed at the theater, finally break from his paralysis. He starts to run towards her, but she is in the center of the vast stage, and he is in the wings. It feels like he is moving through water. Another figure, a fellow dancer from the Cordy Ballet, shows incredible presence of mind. She runs towards Emma, her own practice skirt held out, trying to beat at the flames, to smother them with her own body if necessary. It is an act of incredible bravery. But it is the lead tenor of the opera, a man named Placide Alois Charles Niot, who is closest to her. He sees her, a frantic, screaming pillar of fire, and he acts. He lunges at her, grabbing her in a powerful bear hug, trying to crush the flames against her body with his own. He throws her to the ground and attempts to roll her on the dusty stage floor. The heavy wool of his own costume offers him some protection, but his hands are badly burned as he beats at the flames consuming her. The details of this moment have been debated by historians. Some accounts say 2 or 3 stagehands also rushed to help, throwing themselves on top of her with a heavy blanket. Others focus solely on the heroism of the tenor. The chaos of the moment makes a single, clear narrative impossible. What is certain is that for what felt like an eternity, but was likely less than a minute, there was a frantic, desperate struggle on the floor of the Paris opera stage. A tangle of bodies, the smell of burning fabric, burned hair, burned flesh, and the horrifying, muffled screams of the victim. Finally, the last of the flames are extinguished. The fire is out. A flipped, acrid smoke hangs in the air, catching in the harsh work light. A terrible silence descends upon the stage, broken only by the sound of Emma's agonized moans and the ragged, panicked breathing of the people who saved her. She lies on the floor, a smoking, blackened ruin, where just moments before a star had stood. The rehearsal is over. The silence that follows the frantic act of extinguishing the flames is heavy and profound. For a moment, the stage becomes a tableau of shock. The tenor, an IOT, is on his knees, breathing heavily, staring at his own blistered hands. The other dancers who rush to help are stumbling back, their faces streaked with sodden tears. The rest of the company stands frozen, a gallery of horrified spectators. Then, chaos erupts. The stage manager finally finds his voice, shouting for water, for a doctor. People start moving, but their actions are clumsy, uncoordinated. Someone runs off to fetch a physician from the neighborhood. Someone else finds a blanket to cover Emma's ravaged body. The tinny piano in the pit, which had fallen silent, now seems to mock the scene with its quiet presence. You move closer, an unseen observer in the haze. The sight is devastating. The beautiful, airy tattoo is gone. In its place are charred, blackened tatters of fabric fused to her skin. The fire has done its terrible work with brutal efficiency, where the layers of tolerant muslin were thickest. Around her hips and legs, the burns are the deepest. Her arms and torso are also horribly burned. Only her face, which she had instinctively covered with her hands, is largely spared. Marita Gliani, her legendary mentor, had been watching the rehearsal from the dark, empty auditorium. She rushes onto the stage. The ironclad composure she is famous for has shattered. She lets out a cry of pure anguish and kneels beside Emma, her face a mask of grief and disbelief. She can do nothing but whisper Emma's name, over and over again, a desperate, heartbroken mantra. The first attempts at aid are well-intentioned, but medically catastrophic by modern standards. Someone fetches a large container of oil from the theatre's lighting workshop, the very oil used in the old lamps before the gaslight era, and they begin to slather it over her burns. This was a common folk remedy at the time, but it was one of the worst things they could have done. The soot, greasy oil would have trapped the heat in, prevented the wounds from breathing, and created a perfect breeding ground for infection. This moment highlights a grim reality of 19th century medicine. There was no understanding of germ theory. The concept of sterile bandages or antiseptic wound care did not exist. People weren't trying to help, but their very efforts were likely contributing to the long-term damage and the immense suffering that would follow. Historians of medicine often point to cases like this to illustrate how profoundly the lack of basic scientific knowledge could turn a survivable injury into a fatal one. The question of why a doctor wasn't present at the theatre during rehearsals is a point of some historical debate. Large, prestigious institutions like the opera often had a physician on call, but not necessarily on site for something as routine as a rehearsal. The speed with which a doctor was summoned and the quality of the initial care provided became points of contention in the official inquiries that followed. Was the opera negligent, or were they simply operating under the standard, and tragically inadequate, procedures of the day? Eventually, a stretcher is brought. The scene is one of controlled panic as several men carefully lift Emma's shrouded form. Every touch, Every movement elicits a fresh wave of agony from her. They carry her off the stage, through the labyrinthine backstage corridors, and to her nearby apartment in the Rue Saint-Lazare. The journey itself must have been an excruciating ordeal. As she is carried away, a strange, eerie silence falls over the stage once more. The performers and crew are left standing there, amidst the debris of a disaster. On the floor, you can see the scorched, blackened outline of a human body. A ghastly shadow burned into the wood. There is the lingering, sickeningly sweet smell of burnt sugar from the starched fabric, mixed with something far worse. The rehearsal is not just over. The entire world of the Paris Opera has been fractured. The unspoken fear that had always lurked in the wings has finally stepped into the spotlight and shown its true, horrific face. The magic is gone, replaced by the brutal reality of what they're beautiful, dangerous uttered raw. The tragedy does not stay within the cold stone walls of the Salle Pelletier for long. News of this kind, especially when it involves a famous and beloved star, has a life of its own. It escapes the backstage doors and spills out into the gaslit streets of Paris. You can almost feel the story spreading through the city like a contagion. It begins with the members of the opera company themselves. They leave the theater in a state of shock, and they talk. They tell their families, their friends, the patrons of the cafes they frequent after work. The story is repeated, each time with slight variations, the details growing more dramatic and horrifying with each retelling. Did you hear? Emma Livry, the butterfly, in flames. By the next morning, it is the only thing anyone in Paris is talking about. The story has made its way to the city's many newspapers. You can imagine the scene in the newsrooms. The frantic energy, the editors shouting for more details, the reporters scrambling to piece together the narrative. This is a sensational story, a perfect storm of celebrity, beauty, and tragedy. It is exactly the kind of news that sells papers. You find yourself standing on a Parisian boulevard as the morning papers arrive. The vendors, the CRIEURS, are shouting the headlines. Their voices cut through the normal morning clamor of carriage wheels and market sellers. The Figaro. Quel accident terrible at l'Opera. The terrible accident at the opera. La Ballerina Livry. Victime des flammes. Ballerina Livry, victim of the flames. People snatch the papers from their hands. They gather in small, somber groups on the street corners, reading the accounts aloud. The news hits the city like a physical blow. Emma Livry was not just a dancer. She was a symbol of Parisian grace and artistry. She was their butterfly. The public's relationship with her was, from a distance, one of love and adoration. To hear of her suffering in such a grotesque way is a profound shock to the city's collective psyche. The newspaper articles themselves are a fascinating study in 19th century journalism. They are filled with dramatic, flowery language, often sacrificing factual accuracy for emotional impact. They describe the scene in lurid detail, painting a picture of screaming chaos and heroic rescues. The tenor, an IOT, is instantly hailed as a national hero. His burned hands are described with reverent detail. Emma is portrayed as a tragic, innocent victim, a beautiful flower consumed by a cruel fire. This is where the public narrative begins to be shaped, and it introduces a subtle historical debate about the role of the press in this tragedy. Were the newspapers simply reporting the news, or were they actively constructing a myth? By focusing on the sensationalism and the personal heroism, they conveniently avoided asking tougher, more systemic questions. They wrote about the tragic accident but spent little link investigating the known, long-standing fire hazards at the opera. They celebrated the hero who fought the fire, but they didn't question the management who had allowed the conditions for the fire to exist. The press, in its hunger for a dramatic story, helped frame the event as a freak occurrence, a one-off tragedy, rather than the inevitable result of a deeply flawed system. One small, almost ghoulish detail you learn is that some papers even published diagrams of the stage, showing the position of the gas lights and the exact spot where Emma was standing. It was a form of disaster tourism in print, allowing the public to vicariously experience the horror from the safety of their breakfast tables. This fed the public's fascination but did little to foster any real understanding or call for change. As you watch the city absorb the news, you see a mixture of reactions. There is genuine sadness and sympathy, but there is also a morbid curiosity, a thrill of horror. The story of Emma Livry has been transformed from a personal tragedy into a piece of public property. She is no longer just a person. She is a story, a headline, a cautionary tale. The fire that consumed her on stage is now a different kind of fire. A fire of public fascination and gossip, spreading rapidly through the streets of Paris, ensuring that her private agony would be a very public spectacle. Back at the Salle aux Pleitiers, a different kind of fire has been extinguished, the fire of artistic creation. The news of Emma's accident doesn't just shock the city, it paralyzes the opera. The immediate aftermath is a stunned, deafening silence that falls over the entire institution. You drift through the now empty corridors of the theatre. The rehearsal rooms are dark. The main stage, with its ghastly scorch mark, is deserted. The decision comes down from the directors swiftly. All performances are suspended. The great machine of the Paris Opera, which for decades had ground on relentlessly through wars, political upheavals, and financial crises, has shuddered to a halt. A star has been extinguished, and the darkness she has left behind is total. The emotional toll on the company is immense. These were not just Emma's colleagues, they were her family. They had trained with her, competed with her, celebrated with her. Now, they are united in a shared trauma. You see small groups of dancers huddled together, weeping, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and anew, terrifying awareness of their own mortality. Every one of them has stood where Emma stood. Every one of them has worn that same kind of dress. The thought, "It could have been me," is a cold, silent terror in the heart of every single performer. The tenor, NIOT, who had acted so heroically, is now dealing with his own physical and emotional scars. His hands are bandaged, the burns making it impossible for him to work. He is celebrated as a hero in the press, but you can see the haunted look in his eyes. He is the man who held a living torch in his arms. The memory of her screams, the feel of the fire, is a private horror that no amount of public praise can erase. This event also triggers a strange and somewhat morbid phenomenon: the trade in relics. Almost immediately, pieces of Emma's charred costume become sought-after items. A tiny, blackened scrap of tile that was swept up from the stage floor is a prized, if ghoulish, memento. There are stories, though likely apocryphal, of stagehands selling these grim souvenirs to morbid collectors. This desire to own a piece of the tragedy is a bizarre testament to her fame and the public's fascination with her fate. It's a practice that seems shocking to us, but it speaks to a 19th century relationship with death and celebrity that was very different from our own. The financial and logistical consequences for the opera are also severe. Cancelling performances means a huge loss of revenue. The entire schedule has to be reshuffled. Roles have to be recast. The revival of L'Homme et de Portici is abandoned indefinitely. The entire company is thrown into a state of uncertainty. And this is where a quiet, uncomfortable historical debate emerges among scholars of institutional history. How much of the opera's response was driven by genuine grief and concern, and how much was a calculated exercise in public relations? Suspending performances was, on one level, a sign of respect for a beloved artist, but it was also a necessary move to control the narrative. By shutting its doors, the management could get ahead of the scandal, manage the press inquiries, and prepare its official defense for the investigations that were sure to follow. Was the silence of the opera a respectful hush, or the cautious silence of an organization preparing for a legal battle? The truth, as is so often the case, is probably a messy combination of both. For now, the great theatre on the Rue La Poitiers is a tomb. The gas lights are off. The stage is empty. The vibrant, chaotic world of performance has been replaced by an atmosphere of mourning and fear. The accident has done more than just injure a single dancer. It has ripped a hole in the fabric of the institution itself. It has forced a mirror up to their faces, and the reflection is one of negligence, vanity, and a beautiful, deadly art form that has finally, irrevocably, claimed its brightest star. The silence is a tribute, but it is also an admission of guilt. The show, for the first time in a long time, cannot go on. We leave the silent theatre and the shocked city behind and travel to a quiet, darkened room in an apartment on the Rue Saint-Lazare. This is Emma's home, and this is where the true, protracted horror of the story unfolds, far away from the public gaze. The fiery spectacle on the stage was over in minutes, but the consequences of that fire would last for 8 long, agonizing months. You are a silent presence in the corner of her sick room. The air is heavy with the scent of medicine, bandages, and sickness. The curtains are drawn, keeping the room in a perpetual twilight. Emma lies in her bed, a still, bandaged figure. She is in constant, excruciating pain. The burns, which cover an estimated 40% of her body, are a daily torment. Her doctors, the best that Paris can offer, attend to her regularly, but their best is, by modern standards, appallingly primitive. You watch them as they perform the daily ritual of changing her dressings. It is an ordeal of almost unimaginable agony. The bandages, often stuck to the weeping wounds, have to be soaked and peeled away, taking with them any new, delicate skin that may have tried to form. Emma's cries of pain filled the small apartment. The medical treatments they employ are a grim catalogue of 19th century practice. They cover her wounds in all manner of ointments, from simple lime water and oil to more complex, unlikely useless, chemical concoctions. One of the primary treatments used was silver nitrate, a caustic substance applied directly to the wounds. The theory was that it would cauterize the tissue and prevent putrefaction. In reality, it was intensely painful and did little to stop the real enemy, which was infection. And infection is the shadow that hangs over this entire scene. With no understanding of bacteria, the doctors work with unwashed hands. The bandages are clean, but not sterile. Every day, they are unknowingly introducing new germs into her ravaged body. She develops fevers, chills, and the other telltale signs of sepsis. The body's overwhelming and life-threatening response to infection. Her long, slow decline is a classic case study in pre-listeria in medicine. This period also brings to light a strange and little-known aspect of her story, the role of photography. In a decision that seems ghoulish to us, her family allowed a famous photographer, Felix Nadal, to take pictures of her in her sickbed. These photographs were not for public consumption, but rather intended as a medical record and perhaps a private memento. They show a figure swathed in bandages, her face still recognizable but etched with suffering. The existence of these photos raises uncomfortable questions about Victorian attitudes towards suffering and remembrance. Was it a scientific act, a loving tribute, or a morbid intrusion into her private agony? Historians are still divided on the intent and propriety of these haunting images. Throughout this ordeal, Emma shows moments of incredible fortitude. She is lucid for much of the time. She dictates letters, meets with a few close friends, and even discusses her own case with her doctors with a detached, clinical curiosity. There are reports that she never once blamed anyone for the accident, taking full responsibility upon herself. "I was careless," she is said to have whispered. But there are also moments of profound despair. The pain is relentless. The disfigurement is devastating for a woman whose entire identity was tied to her physical beauty and perfection. Marie Tagliani is a constant visitor, sitting by her bedside for hours, a silent, grieving witness to the destruction of her brilliant protégée. The guilt she must have felt is unimaginable. The months drag on. Winter turns to spring, and spring turns into the heat of summer. Outside her window, Paris life continues. But inside this room, Time is measured only in pain and the slow, inevitable losing battle against infection. The doctors, having exhausted all their treatments, can do little more than try to manage her pain with increasing doses of opium. Finally, in August 1863, 8 months after she absent-mindedly shook out her skirt, her body can fight no more. The long, painful goodbye comes to an end. Emma Livry, the butterfly, dies in her bed, not from the fire itself, but from its slow, septic aftermath. She is 20 years old. The spectacular, violent horror of the accident is dwarfed by the quiet, protracted misery of its consequences. In the somber days following Emma's death, the machinery of officialdom finally grinds into motion. The whispers and headlines are no longer enough. There must be an investigation. A formal inquiry is launched by the authorities to determine the cause of the accident and to assign blame, if any is to be found. You find yourself in a stuffy, wood-paneled room, where a panel of sober-faced men, magistrates, government officials, and representatives from the opera are gathered. They are here to create the official, historical record of what happened. This is the process of turning a chaotic, human tragedy into a neat, bureaucratic report. The witnesses are called one by one. The stagehands, the director, the other dancers. They recount the events of that cold November day, their voices low and nervous in the formal setting. Their testimonies are largely consistent. Emma was standing too close to the lights. She was warned. She made a careless gesture. The narrative quickly solidifies around the idea of a tragic mistake on the part of the victim. Then, the focus shifts to the institution itself. Was the Paris Opera negligent? The director is called to testify. He is a man skilled in the art of political survival. He produces the waiver, the piece of paper that Emma herself had signed, formally declining the fire retardant treatment. He presents it to the panel. It is his trump card. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief from the officials. Here is a clear, simple answer. The opera had offered a solution. The dancer, a celebrated artist of sound mind, had refused it. The document is a powerful piece of evidence. It effectively shifts the legal and moral responsibility from the institution onto the individual. The line of questioning moves away from why was the stage so dangerous, and towards why did Mademoiselle Livry make such a foolish choice. This is where the ghost of Emma herself is called to testify. Her reported statements from her sickbed, her refusal to blame anyone, her acceptance of her own carelessness, are entered into the record. She becomes, posthumously, the star witness for the defense. She has, in her tragic nobility, absolved the very system that created the conditions for her death. The search for a scapegoat is a complex dance. No single person is ever truly held accountable. The gaslighter insists the pressure in the pipes was normal. The director points to the waiver. The set designer argues the placement of the scenery was standard practice. Everyone did their job according to the established, if deeply flawed, procedures of the day. The blame becomes diffuse, spread so thinly across the entire organization that no one individual bears its weight. The final verdict of the inquiry is, predictably, that it was a fatality, a tragic misfortune, an accident for which no one could be held criminally liable. This outcome fuels a debate that has fascinated legal and organizational historians ever since. Was this a just conclusion, based on the evidence, or was it a cover-up, a powerful institution protecting itself? Some argue that, by the laws and standards of the 19th century, the verdict was correct. Personal responsibility was a much stronger legal concept then, and Emma's signed waiver was an almost insurmountable legal defense for the opera. Others argue that this is a classic case of institutional failure. The concept of safety culture didn't exist, but the principle of it was being violated every day. The investigation focused on the final, single error, the unsafe act by the dancer, rather than the unsafe conditions created by the management. They blamed the person who fell off the cliff, rather than asking why there was no guardrail in the first place. The inquiry was not a search for truth, but a search for the most convenient resolution, one that would allow the powerful institution of the opera to move on with minimal disruption. One of the more peculiar footnotes to the investigation is the public reaction to the tenor. Don Iot, while hailed as a hero, some darker rumors circulated that his embrace, while well-intentioned, may have pressed the burning fabric more tightly to her skin, deepening the burns. This was never proven and is likely untrue, but it speaks to the messy, contradictory nature of public opinion in the wake of a disaster. Even a hero cannot escape the stain of such a horrific event. In the end, the official story is written. It is a story of a tragic, personal error. A supremely talented but careless young artist made a fatal mistake. The institution is exonerated. The search for a scapegoat ends where it began, with the victim herself. The book is closed. The report is filed. And the Paris Opera prepares to finally reopen its doors. With the official inquiry concluded, and the blame conveniently assigned to the victim, the Paris Opera is finally ready to move on. But the ghost of Emma Livry cannot be banished by a bureaucratic report. Her death has sent a shockwave of genuine fear through the theatrical world. And the public, now acutely aware of the dangers, is watching. The management knows that things cannot simply go back to the way they were. The illusion of safety, which had been maintained for so long, is shattered. They need to be seen to be doing something. And so begins a period of what you might call too late reforms. You are back in the wings of the Sala Politia, but things look and feel different. The changes are subtle at first, then more obvious. The first and most immediate change is a strict, non-negotiable mandate regarding costumes. The vats of Carter Ons fluid, the fire retardant that had been spurned for so long, are now in constant use. A new rule is implemented. No dancer, no matter how famous or how powerful, is allowed on stage unless their costume has been treated. There are no more waivers. There are no more exceptions. You watch as the ballerinas, who had once complained so bitterly about the treatment, now submit their pristine white tutus without a word of protest. The dingy, yellowish hue and the slightly heavy feel of the fabric are no longer seen as an artistic compromise. They are now the color and texture of survival. The aesthetic argument has been rendered utterly irrelevant by Emma's agonizing death. The choice between a beautiful dress and a safe one is no longer a choice at all. Next, you see changes to the stage itself. The old, flimsy wire mesh guards over the footlights are removed and replaced with taller, more robust barriers. The stage managers, now hypervigilant, enforce a strict exclusion zone around any open flames, both on stage and in the wings. The placement of scenery is now meticulously planned with their flow and proximity to gas jets in mind. The theater even invests in better firefighting equipment. The old woolen blankets are still there, but now they are supplemented with large buckets of sand in new, more effective water pumps stationed at key points backstage. Fired reels, which were once a joke, are now conducted with grim seriousness. The theater's resident firefighters are given more authority, their warnings no longer to be casually dismissed by arrogant directors or star performers. One of the more interesting, and less visible, reforms involves the gas system itself. The opera invests in better regulators for the gas table, aiming to prevent the sudden pressure surges that could turn a small flame into a flare. This is a quiet, unglamorous, but incredibly important step. It's an admission that the technology itself, not just the people using it, was part of the problem. Of course, this flurry of reform leads to its own historical debate. Was this a genuine, deep-seated change in the opera's culture, a true safety-first awakening, or was it primarily a public relations maneuver? A series of highly visible changes designed to reassure the public and the authorities so that business could return to normal as quickly as possible. The answer is likely somewhere in the middle. The fear was real. The desire to prevent another such horror was genuine. But the opera was also a business, and restoring public confidence was an absolute financial necessity. The reforms were born of both conscience and commerce. You watch a rehearsal in this new, save for error. The dancers move with a new kind of awareness. They give the gaslights a wide berth. They handle their now heavy, fire-resistant skirts with a caution that was absent before. The magic feels a little less dangerous, a little more constrained. The art form is survived, but a certain reckless, thrilling beauty has been lost, sacrificed on the altar of safety. It is a necessary sacrifice, a lesson learned in the most brutal way possible. The reforms are swift, they are effective, and they are a profound, institutional admission of guilt. Every new rule, every new piece of equipment, is a silent testament to the fact that Emma Livry's death was not a fatality. It was a preventable tragedy. The revolution in stage safety has finally arrived. But it has arrived too late for the one person who paid the ultimate price to make it happen. As the immediate shock of the tragedy fades and the new safety reforms become routine, something strange begins to happen to the story of Emma Livry. Her memory starts to transform. The messy, horrifying reality of her accident and her slow, painful death begins to be polished, smoothed over, and reshaped into something more palatable, more romantic, and ultimately, more useful. You are no longer in the theatre, but in the drawing rooms and literary salons of Paris. You hear people talking about her, not with the horrified whispers of gossip, but with a kind of reverent, artistic awe. The narrative is changing. She is no longer just a tragic victim of institutional negligence. She is becoming a martyr for the sake of art. This transformation is led by writers, poets, and critics of the day. They see in her story a perfect embodiment of the romantic ideal. The artist who is so purely devoted to beauty that she sacrifices her own life for it. Her famous, alleged quote, "The dress will be ugly, and my wings will not fly," is now repeated not as a sign of youthful folly, but as a heroic manifesto. It is the cry of a true artist who refuses to compromise her vision, even in the face of death. You see poems written in her honor, elegies that compare her to Icarus, who flew too close to the sun in his pursuit of the sublime. They don't dwell on the ugly, clinical details of her burns or the slow agony of her infection. Instead, they focus on the transcendent moment of her fiery dance on stage, framing it not as a panicked flight of terror, an accident, but as a final, glorious, self-immolating performance. She didn't just catch fire. She became fire. She became a literal star, burning out in a blaze of glory. This romanticization serves a very important cultural purpose. It cleanses the story of its uncomfortable truths. It allows people to admire Emma without having to confront the ugly negligence of the opera, the morbid curiosity of the public, or the inadequacy of the medical science of their time. It turns a preventable, systemic failure into a beautiful, noble, and almost inevitable tragedy. It's much easier to mourn a martyr than it is to fix a broken system. One of the most peculiar artifacts of this posthumous myth-making is a sculpture created after her death. It depicts her not in her sickbed, or in the moment of the accident, but as the beautiful butterfly from Lippopinen, rising gracefully towards the heavens. Her face is serene, her form is perfect. The horror is completely erased, replaced by an image of beatific ascension. It is a beautiful lie, carved in stone. This leads to a fascinating and ongoing debate among cultural historians. Who did this myth-making truly serve? On one level, it served Emma's legacy, cementing her place in history as more than just a talented dancer. It gave her a kind of immortality. But on another, deeper level, did it serve the very institutions that failed her, by turning her into a willing martyr? The myth absolves everyone else of their responsibility. If she chose to sacrifice herself for art, then no one is truly to blame. The opera, the audience, the critics, they are all let off the hook. The story becomes a beautiful, closed loop of artistic destiny rather than a messy, open-ended question of justice and reform. You watch as this new, romanticized version of the story takes hold, becoming the dominant narrative that will be passed down through generations. The real Emma Livry. The ambitious, hard-working, perhaps a little arrogant. Terrified young woman who died a slow and agonizing death from sepsis in a darkened room disappears. In her place stands a flawless icon, a secular saint of the ballet. She is no longer a person. She is a myth, a beautiful, tragic, and deeply misleading story that Paris has chosen to tell itself. A story that honors the artist while conveniently forgetting the circumstances of her death. As the myth of Emma Livry as the unique, tragic martyr solidifies in Paris. Let's pull our focus out. Like a camera ascending high above the city, you begin to see that the fire that consumed her was not a singular, isolated event. It was simply the most famous spark in a much larger, international conflagration. The flammable ballet girl was a terrifying trope of the gaslight era, and Emma was not the first, nor would she be the last, to meet this horrific fate. Your perspective shifts to London, a few decades earlier, to the Theatre Royal. Here, another bright young star, Clara Webster, was the talk of the town in December of 1844. During a performance of a ballet called The Revolt of the Harem, the story repeats itself with chilling familiarity. While waiting in the wings for her entrance, Clara's light, gauzy costume brushed against a shaded oil lamp, a predecessor to the gaslight, but no less dangerous. Her dress ignited instantly. She ran, panic, across the stage in front of a horrified audience. The incident was a near-perfect prelude to Emma's. Clara Webster died from her burns 3 days later. The London papers were filled with the same sensational horror, the same public mourning, and then, the memory faded. Now, let's cross the Atlantic. You find yourself in Philadelphia, in the year 1861. Just a year before Emma's accident, at the Continental Theatre, the family of performers, the Gale sisters, are on stage during a spectacular finale involving a pyrotechnic effect. The stray spark lands on the dress of one of the sisters, Colonel, her sisters, Adeline and Celia, rush to her aid, their own flammable costumes catching fire in the process. Several other dancers are also engulfed. The stage becomes a scene of mass horror. 4 of the dancers, including Hannah Gale, would die from their injuries. The event was a national tragedy in America. Yet the news barely caused a ripple back in Paris, where the relentless machinery of the opera continued to operate under the exact same conditions. You begin to see a grim, repeating pattern. A young woman, a flammable dress, an open flame, a moment of horror, a public outcry, and then a collective amnesia. Each city, each theatre seemed to have to learn the same lesson for itself, and each time, the lesson was paid for with a young woman's life. This raises a profound question that historians of technology and safety still grapple with. Why was the transfer of knowledge so poor? In an age of the telegraph and fast steamships, news traveled quickly. The managers of the Paris Opera almost certainly knew about the death of Clara Webster in London. The theatre world was, even then, an international community. Yet, they did nothing. The lessons learned in one theatre were not applied in another. Some historians argue this was due to a kind of institutional arrogance. The Paris Opera, as the self-proclaimed pinnacle of the art form, may have believed that such a thing could never happen to them. Accidents like that were for lesser theatres. In more sophisticated cities, their system was better, their dancers more professional. It's a form of corporate denial that is still seen today. Another, more practical argument points to the lack of any international regulatory bodies or safety standards. There was no international theatre safety board to issue directives. Each theatre was its own little kingdom, with its own rules and its own level of acceptable risk. The idea of universal safety standards was still a century away. You also discover a hidden, almost forgotten casualty of Emma Livry's own accident. One of the dancers from the Corps de Ballet who had rushed to help her, a Mademoiselle Zena Maranti, was herself badly burned on the hands and arms while trying to smother the flames. She survived, but her injuries were severe enough that her own promising dancing career was effectively ended. She became a footnote in Emma's much larger tragedy, a forgotten piece of collateral damage, a reminder that the fire scattered its embers of suffering widely. Seeing these other stories, these other fiery deaths in London, Philadelphia, and countless other cities, changes your perspective on Emma's tragedy. It ceases to be the story of a single, unique martyr. Instead, it becomes the most famous chapter in a much larger, darker anthology. She was not a singular victim of a freak accident. She was the Parisian representative of a whole class of victims, a generation of young women sacrificed to the dangerous combination of a beautiful aesthetic and a new, untamed technology. The fire that took Emma Livry was not a uniquely Parisian fire. It was a global one. The years pass. The gaslight era, with its brilliant, dangerous glow, begins to give way to a new, even more magical technology, electricity. The reforms sparked by Emma's death have made the stages safer, if less thrillingly perilous. Place, the Paris Opera, having survived the scandal, continues its reign as the epicenter of the ballet world, but the building itself, the Sailor Pouletier, seems to hold on to the memory of the tragedy like a stubborn ghost. It is a place marked by fire, and by fire. It is destined to be consumed. The date is now October 28, Yalbachi-sen, just over a decade after Emma's accident. You find yourself standing on the street outside the old opera house. It is the middle of the night. A frantic alarm is ringing, its sound echoing through the sleeping city. The smell of smoke is thick in the air. You look up and see it. The Sailor Pouletier, the grand theatre that housed so much beauty and so much pain, is on fire. Not a small fire in the wings, not a costume ignited by a gas jet, but a massive, unstoppable inferno. Flames are pouring from the windows of the upper floors, reaching into the night sky like demonic arms. The roof is a cauldron of orange and black. The fire had started, ironically, during a rehearsal for a new opera. The initial cause remained one of those small, unsolved historical mysteries. Some reports claimed it was a gas leak in the lighting workshops. Others blamed a new piece of experimental lighting equipment. One persistent, though likely untrue, theory was that it was arson, set by a disgruntled former employee. Whatever the spark, it found a building that was, in essence, a giant, perfectly constructed tinderbox. You watch as the city's firefighters arrive with their steam-powered pumps, but they are fighting a losing battle. The theatre is a labyrinth of dry, painted canvas scenery, wooden beams, rope rigging, and dusty velvet curtains. The miles of lead gas pipes that still run through the building, though largely superseded by new electrical tests, now become conduits for the fire, feeding it, helping it spread through the walls. The entire structure, which had been designed to create illusions of fire and magic, is now being consumed by the real thing. It is a spectacle of terrifying grandeur, a final, unwanted performance. The heat is so intense you can feel it from across the street. The roar of the flames drowns out the shouts of the firemen. The roof collapses with a great, groaning crash, sending a shower of sparks and embers high into the air, raining down on the surrounding neighborhood. There is a profound, almost poetic, irony to this scene. The very building where the management had prioritized spectacle over safety, where they had housed a system of open flames in close proximity to flammable materials for decades, is now being devoured by the exact danger they had so casually ignored for so long. The ghost of Emma Livry seems to hang in the smoke-filled air. It feels less like an accident and more like a reckoning. A final, decisive act of cosmic justice. By morning, the fire is out. The Sailor Pouletier is a blackened, skeletal ruin. The magnificent auditorium is a waterlogged pit of charred timber and twisted metal. The stage, where Taglai and I had taught, where the butterfly had taken flight, where Emma Livry had screamed in agony, is gone. It is a pile of ash. Historians who study the architecture of Paris often debate the true legacy of the Sailor Pouletier. Was it a temple of art? A place that, despite its flaws, nurtured one of the most important periods in the history of ballet. Or was it a fundamentally flawed, dangerous building, a Death Trap whose final destruction was inevitable? The fire certainly settled the debate in a definitive way. The destruction of the old opera house hastened the completion of its successor, the magnificent Palais Garnier, which was already under construction. The new opera house would be a palace of marble and gold, built with the most modern for the time fire safety features. It was the beginning of a new, safer era, the gaslight era, and the building that had been its most glorious and tragic monument was now officially over, reduced to a smoking ruin and a collection of memories. The ashes of the old opera were a start, final closing chapter to a story that had begun with a single, fateful spark. We leave the smoking ruins of the old opera house behind, and our journey through time begins to slow. The specific faces and dates start to fade, leaving behind the soft, lingering echoes of the story. You find yourself in a modern theater, sitting in the comfortable darkness, waiting for a ballet to begin. The house lights dim, but there is no hissing of gas, no wave of heat. The stage is illuminated by a clean, cool, and perfectly controlled electric light. The ballerina who makes her entrance wears a tutu that is a marvel of modern material science. Lightweight, beautiful, and inherently flame retardant. The magic she creates on stage is no less powerful. But the invisible cage of fire that surrounded her predecessors is gone. The art form has evolved. It has learned. It has remembered. The legacy of Emma Livry and the other ballerina masters of the gaslight era is not just in the cautionary tales. It's written into the building codes of every theater in the world. It's present in the fire extinguishers mounted on the walls, in the automatic sprinkler systems hidden in the ceilings, in the fire retardant treatment applied to every curtain and every piece of scenery. Their tragedy became the data that drove a revolution in safety. The ghosts of the gaslight era are now the guardian angels of the modern stage. And yet, the fundamental tensions of their story still exist. The pressure for spectacle, for a bigger and better show, has not gone away. Modern productions use lasers, complex pyrotechnics, and breathtaking aerial acrobatics that come with their own new sets of risks. The debate between artistic vision and safety precautions continues to this day in rehearsal halls and production meetings around the world. Every time a director wants to try a new, daring effect, they are unknowingly having a conversation with the ghost of Emma Livry. The romanticization of the suffering artist also endures. We are still fascinated by stories of performers who push their bodies to the breaking point, who sacrifice their health and well-being for their art. The line between dedication and self-destruction, between ambition and exploitation, remains as blurry as ever. Historians today still quietly debate the core of Emma's story. Was she, in the end, a symbol of artistic integrity? A woman who chose beauty over safety in a final, noble act? Or was she a symbol of systemic failure? A young, vulnerable employee in a dangerous workplace, failed by an institution that valued profit over people. The truth is, she was both. That is what makes her story so complex and so eternally resonant. She was not a simple martyr or a simple victim. She was a real person, caught in a complex web of art, ambition, technology, and commerce. As you watch the modern ballerina take her bow, under the safe, cool glow of the electric lights, you can feel the landmark of history. You can see the faint image of Emma standing beside her, a ghostly figure in a starched white dress. The story is a reminder that behind every beautiful illusion, there is a hidden machinery of work, risk, and sometimes sacrifice. It is a quiet testament to the forgotten lives that were given, willingly or not, to build the world we now inhabit. The fire of the gaslight era has long been extinguished, but its lessons continue to flicker, a softened cautionary glow in the memory of the theater. And so, the story of the beautiful and dangerous dance with fire comes to its gentle, quiet end. The curtain has fallen. The gas lights have been extinguished. and all that remains is the soft echo of the tale in the stillness of your room. You can feel the weight of the story beginning to lift, transforming into the weight of pleasant, peaceful sleep. The figures of Emma, on the flickering flames, can now recede, drifting away, becoming part of the soft, distant landscape of a dream that is already beginning to form. There is nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to follow. There is only this deep sense of comfort, this quiet space, this gentle descent into rest. Our journey together tonight ends here, in this quiet place. Should you need another tale to accompany you further into rest, my library of stories is always open for you. May your dreams be kind. Good night.